His Majesty the King of Spain, Managing Director of the IMF, President of the Basque Government, Minister of Economy, authorities, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure for me to briefly introduce Ms. Lagarde, the Managing Director of the IMF, who is our guest of honor in this opening session. After a successful career in the private sector as a lawyer specialized in labor and antitrust in one of the most prestigious international law firms, Ms. Lagarde joined the French government in 2005. There, she took different positions, first as Minister of Agriculture, then as Minister of Trade, and finally as Minister of Finance until July 2011, when she joined the IMF as Managing Director. There, she had to face an extremely complex environment in the midst of an unprecedented international financial crisis and a deep and long-lasting recession in a significant part of developed economies. Thanks to her leadership, during Ms. Lagarde's tenure, the IMF has reinforced its role as a rigorous, independent, and active player, and its analysis and recommendations have been a key reference for economic policymakers, analysts, and entrepreneurs. Therefore, it is of great interest to listen directly from her about prospects, challenges, and recommendations for the Eurozone and the Spanish economy. Two final questions about this session. Immediately after her speech, we will hold a question and answer session with Ms. Lagarde, so you are all invited to write down your questions and hand them to the assistants. I will do my best to put them together and post them to the Managing Director. And just a final reminder, this event will be live webcast on the web of the forum, www.globalforumspain.com, and will also be active on Twitter under the hashtag GFS14. Now, allow me to give the floor to the Managing Director. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Majestad, Mesdames et Messieurs les ambassadeurs, Mesdames et Messieurs les ministres, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure to be here with you this morning in Bilbao, city of art, industry, and culture. And we were given the exquisite privilege yesterday to visit this extraordinary building of the Guggenheim Museum. I'm particularly delighted to be here today on a theme that was selected, from stability to growth. Well, clearly there is momentum, and this momentum is taking place in Spain. Let me first of all thank our host, Your Majesty, Mr. Minister, Mr. Mayor of Bilbao, and I very much regret as well that he could not be with us today, and I wish him the very best in his current health situation, and indeed, Lehendakari Inigo Urkullu. Bilbao as a city is probably the best example of what can actually take place. How can change affect a city? How can innovation transform the landscape? Despite the challenge of economic adversity, by reforming, adjusting, adopting bold reforms. And because of that, and through excellent mayorship and leadership, Bilbao has risen to become a world-class model for efficient and successful urban transformation. I'm led to believe that the mayor of Bilbao was actually selected as the best mayor in the world in due course. And in many ways, the story of Bilbao under that leadership epitomizes the story of what has happened and what is happening in Europe and in Spain. Indeed, as you have said, Majesty, the global financial crisis has challenged many of our core economic models, many of our policy frameworks, and raised the spectre of catastrophic outcomes for Europe, as a result of which radical reforms, new ways of designing macroeconomic policies was needed and was questioned. And thanks to the formidable actions taken in Europe, and we have commissioners here who have done a fabulous job in that respect, and Spain, national authorities, now the country is turning the corner. Is that to say that everything has been done, that we can go back to business as usual, that complacency can be in order? Far from it. Growth remains too low, unemployment too high. So victory cannot yet be declared on the crisis. In that context, what I would like to do briefly with you this morning before I take your questions is see exactly where we stand at the European level, how we've moved away from the crisis, and what next steps should be taken moving forward. And then I would like to do the same thing in relation to Spain. Where is it at the moment, and what momentum needs to be kept in order to move ahead and respond to the requests of the many unemployed who today are saying, what's in it for me? Growth is fine, not enough. How about the jobs? So let me first of all start with Europe. The euro area is finally emerging from a deep recession. Domestic and external demands are picking up, and financial conditions have eased somewhat. The IMF projection for the euro area in 2014 is 1% growth and 1.4% growth in 2015. That is good news. Yet, as I said, in many European countries, unemployment is still unacceptably high, especially among young people. High debt levels continue to hold momentum back. There is plenty of discussions as to what is the right level and where does it hold growth back. Suffice to say at this point that too high debts holds back growth, and financial fragmentation persists. In addition, we see the risk of prolonged low inflation way below targets. Targets being, as you know, close to and just below 2%, is also looming and could derail the recovery. So what does Europe need to attain a trajectory of strong, sustainable growth that actually creates jobs? Let me set 3 key priorities. Many things should be done, but let me focus on 3. First of all, strengthen the architecture of monetary union. This means completing banking union and auditing and, if needed, repairing balance sheets for the banks. Now, why is it so important? A more complete banking union is essential to reduce financial fragmentation. There is no reason why the subsidiary of a particular company borrows at a very low rate in some of the euro area countries, while at a much higher rate for a similar corporate risk in another member of the eurozone. It's also necessary to sever the link between banks and sovereign that has been so destructive during the crisis. Banks in difficult situations had to be supported by sovereign. Sovereign, in turn, was affected by the situation of the banks. Now, while massive progress has been made in this area, there is more to be done to help deliver timely and efficient resolution, particularly on a cross-border basis. And most importantly, a common backstop needs to be established. That's one thing. Second thing is the health of the banking system and the health of banks. And I'm not here suggesting that banks are in bad shape. What I'm simply saying is that because of the perception, it is indispensable that a proper asset quality review and proper stress tests be conducted in the short run. And in that respect, the ECB and the EBA will be forthcoming with this exercise, which will need to be well implemented, rigorously so, and exceptionally well communicated in order to dissipate the risk that perception overshadows the reality. So that's first priority. More complete banking union. Good monetary union. The second priority is to sustain demand through monetary and fiscal policies. The ECB, one will remember the Olympic Games of July 2012, at the time when the president of the ECB said in a speech in London, "We will do what it takes, and believe me, it will be enough." That was the triggering point, together with successive interest rate moves, but that was the trigger for a monetary policy that restored confidence and that helped address the issue of demand. Now, we believe at the IMF that more can be achieved. There is still room to maneuver that can be used, with a view to bringing the inflation to target and with a view to procuring the creation of jobs. That's for the monetary policy. Let's look at the fiscal stance. We believe that as fiscal stance is positioned in the Eurozone, it is the right pace, it's appropriate. But we also believe that it must be complemented at the national levels with credible, medium-term frameworks and appropriately paced consolidation. No need necessarily to rush to do harsh consolidation, but to indicate that it's a direction that is constant and that will be anchored. The third priority is to continue advancing product and labour reforms, which can make a significant contribution in unleashing productivity and restoring competitiveness. The OECD has done massive work in that respect and set out targets and proposals. Simpler tax systems, streamlined procedure for entry and exit of firms, stronger national insolvency regimes, all of that can help release investment and increase employment. So in sum, the challenge now for European leaders is to accelerate reforms that would set the stage for a more robust monetary union, one that is able to sustain, as I said, higher growth, more jobs. Let us now look at Spain. Here again, there is good news, and there is news that could be better, which means that there is room for improvement. So, good news is, as I said, Spain has turned the corner. Growth has returned in the second half of 2013 after more than 2 years. Employment is gradually improving. Financial and economic conditions have improved significantly. In fact, we looked at the record of the last 30 years, and Spain's exports have grown faster than Germany's exports during the crisis and since the crisis, helping to post a current account surplus for the first time in 20 years. Now, indeed, even if the weak economy has played a role in boosting exports, the fact remains that Spain is one of the largest current account improvements by a major economy without an exchange rate depreciation. With exchange rate depreciation on the top, figure out how much that would be. But with exchange rate as it stands, one of the best performance in the last 30 years. Now, much of the credit for this turnaround goes to bold and broad-based reforms that Spain has embarked upon since the onset of the crisis. And that reform package was anchored in 3 key pillars. The first one, as was mentioned, is the financial sector program. This program was key in restoring the health of Spanish banks. It transparently assessed bank recapitalization needs. It forced them to fill their shortfalls, including through a 100 billion euro credit lines from Europe. Not to say that the shortfall was that much, it was much lower than that. And it strengthened financial regulation to ensure that institutions such as the Cajas can no longer operate without being checked and controlled. The second pillar of the reform package was the labour market reform. The crisis brought to the fore long-standing problems in the Spanish labour market, and the 2012 labour market reform was a major step forward, helping employment recover even as the economy had just started to expand. The third and final pillar of the package is the fiscal reform. The budget had swung from a surplus in 2007 to a huge deficit in 2009. In response to that, a range of difficult measures, along with stronger control on regional finances, I know Basque is a little bit special, have allowed the fiscal position to improve appreciably despite the recession. I'm saying it's a bit special because in terms of devolution it's a bit special, but in terms of rigor in administrating its public finance, it is certainly in excellent condition. Now, I fully appreciate that this package was difficult to implement, and it took a great deal of courage, political courage, resilience, and determination on the part of the Spanish people. But clearly, this set of mutually reinforcing reforms is now finally paying off in terms of improved confidence, higher competitiveness, and critically, better growth and hopefully more jobs. Yet, as is the case for Europe, the case is true in Spain as well, the scars of the crisis have left many, many stigmas that will take years to eliminate. Perhaps the most striking scar is that of unemployment. The crisis pushed up employment from 8% in 2007 to way over 20% in 2013. Almost 6 million people who would like to have a job do not have one. Half of these, 3 million, have been out of work for more than 1 year. And every day that goes by without that job increases the risk of them not reaccessing the job market. The hysteresis move is underway. It is also deeply depressing that unemployment among young people is well above 50%. And there is nothing worse for young entrants on the job market to have their dreams, their potential sapped by the blight of unemployment. A long spell of unemployment during one's youth leaves long-lasting personal, social, and economic scars, including a reduction in lifetime earnings. So the scars last in the long term. So what can Spain do as well to embark on a trajectory of more permanent, higher growth and employment? And here I'm reminded, and I would like to quote President Rajoy, who said, "Spain is out of recession, but not out of the crisis. The task now is to achieve a vigorous recovery that allows us to create jobs." He definitely has his priority where it should be. And we fully agree and support the fact that creating jobs must be now the overriding priorities of the policymakers. Now, what does that mean in practical terms? It means that there can be no let-up in the reform momentum. The strong reform momentum that has served the Spanish economy well so far needs to continue. And I would like to identify briefly 3 areas where we believe that reform has to continue. First one, not the easiest one, is the reform of the labour market. It needs to be deepened, not to the benefit of those who have a job, but in order to benefit all those who want to have a job. Both firms and their workers need to be assured that they can reach appropriate agreements on working conditions and wages. It's essential for jobs to be created. Workers need to be directly supported as well through enhanced skill trainings, job search assistance for the unemployed, particularly those who have been away from the job market for a long time, and by further cutting the tax costs of employing people. Not necessarily reducing wages, but reducing the tax costs, particularly where it's more efficient, where it has the more multiplying effect, which is on the lower paid. The second area concerns debt, which needs to be lowered. Lowered for firms, and this means helping insolvent but viable firms restructure their debt so that they can stay in business and continue to invest and hire people. For the government, it means continuing to reduce the fiscal deficit in a gradual, growth-friendly way, especially by relying more on indirect taxation. The third area is the business environment, which needs to be strengthened. Making it easier for business to start up and grow will lift the capacity to create employment. Making domestic firms more competitive will also boost their employment and productivity. The government's plan to liberalize professional services, and having been in this particular field myself as a former and reformed now lawyer, I know how difficult it is, huge resistance, but this is the way to go. Promoting free trade among Spain's regions go very much in that direction as well, not to mention the fact that indeed international trade and the support that can be given to the international negotiations in that respect are also important. So there is no doubt that the reforms that I outlined for Europe and for Spain will take several years of determined efforts by both government and society. Yet Cervantes had Don Quixote say once, "Diligence is the mother of good fortune." Who am I to argue with Cervantes? And just as Bilbao transformed itself through the 25 projects in 25 years, the imperative for both Spain and Europe today is to continue to commit to their ambitious reform agenda. It is our collective responsibility not only to restore strong growth, but also to respond to the needs of those young people who are saying, "Where are the jobs?" Thank you very much. I'll stay here. Okay.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lagarde. There are numerous questions. I have tried to do my best to gather them by subjects. In general, I would say that they are very much related to risks. I would say that people is eager to hear your views about possible risks. One of them is on monetary policy, the effects of the Federal Reserve tapering and the impact not only in emerging economies but also in the euro economy. How do you view this impact?
Shall I take the question and then we keep rolling? Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, tapering in and of itself is good news. And why is that? It's because the federal banks, which is the one that is conducting that program at the moment, but later on, hopefully, the Bank of England, the Bank of Japan, and later on the ECB, all of them are going to have to go through that process of tapering. And I'm saying it's good news because it shows that the situation is improving on the domestic market, that the central bankers are looking at. So the fact that the US economy is doing better and the fact that the Fed has decided to reduce its volume of purchases is a good indication. Now, clearly that has had consequences in terms of flow of capital that had flown into the emerging markets are, for some of them, flowing out of them and coming back to the US dollar markets because the long-term interest rates are a bit higher. And we have also observed, in terms of currency, a degree of volatility as a result of that announced and then gradually implemented tapering. We believe that if this tapering is well announced, properly anticipated, well communicated, a lot of the unintended consequences, in other words, the outflow of capital, the volatility of currency is in particular, can be qualified, can be kept under control. So we believe that there has to be good communication, anticipated implementation and delivered implementation, and that there has to be enough cooperation between central bankers so that the central bankers of the emerging market economies or the central banker in the Eurozone can actually take the appropriate measures to anticipate those potential risks. That was, in essence, also the conclusions that were reached at the G20 in Sydney about 10 days ago. And there was a lot of exchange of views and a lot of communication between the parties in that respect.
Thank you, Ms. Lagarde. Given that we are with monetary policy, I would then pose several questions about European monetary policy. Some of them refer to the issue of deflation, the risk of deflation. Could the ECB take a step forward in quantitative easing? How do you see those risks?
Well, first of all, it's all a question of definition. We are not seeing deflation as has recently been defined by the President of the European Central Bank. A reduction of prices that affects the range of products across a very sizable number of countries. That is not in the cards. What we are seeing is low inflation, and in some countries very low inflation. And what we are saying is that if it happens for an extended period of time, it could potentially de-anchor the expected anticipation by the consumers, by the operators, about longer-term inflation. Not seen yet, but we're saying that's a potential risk that is out there. You know, we range that risk at about 15–20%, which is why we recommend that central bankers guard against it and have available and ready the tools that could respond to that in terms of monetary policy, which means, you know, clearly in the first place the interest rate.
Okay, thank you very much.
And other tools as needed.
Once we are, perhaps we could turn into a banking union, and how do you assess the likelihood of the banking union breaking the loop between sovereign and banks' risks?
That's a big key question. You know, as long as banking union relies heavily on the sovereigns to actually fill in the gaps, filling the shortfalls, filling the problems that would be caused by a very difficult situation encountered by major banks. The loop is not severed, and there is still that relationship between the banking system and the sovereigns that actually weakens both. So that's the reason why we're insisting that a common backstop be established, be strong enough in order to essentially sever the link between banks and the sovereigns, so that when there is an issue, the backstop can be used instead of the bank and the banking system turning to the sovereign, therefore weakening the sovereign. I mean, there are plenty of great bankers in the room, so I'm sure that they have their views as well.
Okay, perhaps we could turn into growth and what the economic policy could do to foster growth. There were a lot of questions on this matter. One of them is about exchange rate. How do you see the euro playing a role there to try to also help for the European recovery?
Well, the euro is operating in a floating system, and there is only so much that can be done about the rate at which it is valued relative to other currencies. It's obvious that when you have a lower currency, it helps particularly boost those activities that are export-driven. I'm not sure that there is a lot that I can recommend in that respect, but.
Okay. There were also several questions on fiscal stimulus. Could you develop a little bit more? How do you see the fiscal policy, and also how there is room for fiscal incentives for growth?
You're doing something wrong here? Oh, okay.
Thank you.
We, as I said in my remarks, we believe that demand can be supported by policy of different kinds, monetary and fiscal policies. The first one that we see at play and which has operated, which can continue to do so, is the monetary policy. When you have money flowing, credit being extended to the economy, that certainly helps significantly. And hopefully that will continue and be improved even further. We believe that the fiscal pace that is currently in place in the euro area in particular is okay. It's not excessive. We had strongly advocated that it be extended over time. The Commission did so, And certainly Spain has had the benefit of a slightly extended period of time. You know, equally it should not be either accelerated, made harder, and there has to be a clear indication of the medium-term pace. Now, if you've exhausted the monetary policies, if you've gone as far as you could in terms of tempering the pace, then other tools may have to be considered. But I would say that at the moment there is enough monetary policy space to be used before anything else is considered.
Okay. There is one question about the impact on the stress test and the banking union, and the question was there was sort of concern about the restrictive impact of being too ambitious in that exercise.
I disagree with that. I disagree with that because I think that if you mean by being ambitious, being transparent, being rigorous in terms of accounting principles being adopted, and being coordinated and harmonized across the various institutions, you have to be ambitious. I mean, what you want to do with the asset quality review and with the stress test is demonstrate to the face of the world and to the investors that the banks and the banking system in the Eurozone are solid and stable. If you start, you know, being not too ambitious and a bit complacent and a bit modest here, you don't destroy the perception. You don't, you know, pass the test. So no, ambition is good.
Okay, let us then turn to the Spanish economy. How do you assess the banking program of restructuring and recapitalization?
I have to say very well, because first of all, because I believe it, and second, because the IMF was a partner with the Spanish authorities. There was no financing, there was no program of that sort, but we were active and we had a very, very good cooperation in order to best design the program, audit what was being done, and monitor it on a regular basis. We've given the final review and full clearance as late as February 20th, I think it was, Luis. So, no, we think it was well thought through, well implemented, and that has demonstrated result. Now, to answer a point that was made earlier, I'm not sure that it is giving the banking system a soul, but it is certainly allowing better control, because the prudential control was also reinforced as a result.
Okay, and just a final question about the prospects of the Spanish economy. How do you see that Spain is really entering into a sustainable growth?
I think I said strongly, and I will be happy to repeat it, Spain is turning the corner. Spain is moving into positive growth. And when one of the best indication of that is when you question investors, when you question companies that are investing anywhere in the world and which can go in Spain but could go anywhere else. And when you ask those questions at the moment, a lot of investors are looking at Spain avec les yeux de Jiménez. So they are keenly interested by the Spanish market. The next thing, and the most difficult one, is to make sure that that growth, those investments, will turn into jobs. That's going to be the one where, the priorities have to be set and the focus has to be established. But, I really wish the people of Spain and the authorities of Spain the very best of luck in doing so. I think the corner's been turned. It's a question of pursuing the effort and delivering on the jobs priority.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm supposed to make a brief conclusion and takeaways from this session. It's been of great interest to hear directly from Ms. Lagarde her assessment about prospects and challenges for the Eurozone economy and the Spanish economy. I think that there is a big contrast with the European economy 2 years ago and today. At that moment, the European economy was the main source of concern and risks in the international economy. And actually, the focus were basically concentrated on the Spanish economy, about its imbalances, the doubts about the banking system, and now the situation has turned completely to a different prospect and perception. As the managing director says, the Eurozone economy and the Spanish economy has turned the corner. However, there are still risks and there is still work to do. It's important to deliver what has been designed as the banking union. It's important to deliver on structural reforms, and it's important to keep the demand policy focus on also helping to the recovery. So thank you very much again, and thank you for coming to share with us your views. Thank you.